On Labor Day, a look at how far we've fallen on an expanded edition of Your Labor Minute. Hello, I'm Mark Harrison. Webster's defines labor as the expenditure of physical or mental effort, especially when difficult or compulsory, a human activity that provides the goods or services in an economy. And while the labor network is dedicated to providing news for everyone who works, we tend to do a lot of stories about labor unions. And here's why. Take a look at this chart from the Economic Policy Institute. The chart begins on the left-hand side at the time of the Industrial Revolution, when there was a wide disparity in income distribution and a low participation rate in labor unions. Toward the middle of the chart, we see the lines merge in the late 1950s when our middle class was at its highest prosperity level in U.S. history, a time when union participation reached its peak with a third of all workers belonging to a union. In the 1960s and 70s, union membership began a slow decline, as did the middle class standard of living, and we begin to see more and more households needing two incomes to maintain the same level of prosperity. And then in 1981, President Ronald Reagan fired striking air traffic controllers, and that sent a signal that America had entered a new anti-union era as labor laws were struck down and the National Labor Relations Act was diminished or just plain ignored. And now we find ourselves on the extreme right side of the chart where we see the same income disparity gap we had more than 100 years ago. What went wrong? Somewhere along the line, we began to take for granted things like workplace safety, weekends and the 40-hour work week, and pensions and sick leave and benefits and decent incomes that meant we could vacation and save for our children's college educations. Somewhere along the line, we forgot that people had fought and died for these things. And then, just about the time we should have been seeing stories on the evening news that there were signs that the standard of living for the middle class was in steep decline, something else happened. Corporations, who liked the way things were going for the middle class, began buying and consolidating television networks and affiliate groups and pressured Washington politicians and President Bill Clinton into signing the Telecommunications Act of 1996. So now we hear little news about labor and the plight of the middle class. And while typical worker incomes have increased by only 10% since the 70s, CEOs' incomes have risen by nearly 1,000%. So yes, we cover a lot of labor union news because history has shown us that an interesting thing happens when a third of us are members of unions. Businesses who don't have unions must match union wages and benefits to keep their best workers. You see, we reach a sort of equilibrium where every one of us who labors is treated with respect and fairness. And you know what else? We're happier, less stressed and less suicidal, and we hate each other less. We work together rather than fighting against each other for a smaller and smaller piece of the pie. We've been made fools of because instead of fighting for what we deserve in the workplace, we have been convinced that we should be arguing amongst ourselves over the wedge issues of guns and gender, sexual orientation, skin color, religion, and ethnic backgrounds. It's right out of the corporation's manual on page 1. Keep them fighting amongst themselves. Great things happen in this country when we manage to come together as one and direct our outrage toward our leaders instead of one another. History proves this. Progressive reforms of the early 1900s, the New Deal of the 1930s, the civil rights struggles of the 1950s and 60s, reforms for women, disabled people, gay people. If we are to reverse the trend of our lost middle class and the income inequality that we now experience, we need to begin working with one voice. We need to face the internationalization of global enterprises with education and training, the automation of the workplace with education and training. And we need to begin looking toward the future with one voice that lets the powerful know that we will no longer be fooled into thinking we are each other's enemy. Rather, we must see the enemy as those who have divided us and who no longer treat us with the respect we deserve for our contributions to our leaders' lives of privilege. I'm Mark Harrison with your Labor Minute.